Yep.
Oh, look, we're there.
Just let himself go.
Are we in this?
I see you. You're in it, whoever you are. But you're on mute.
Yeah. I wanna.
We're at
There we are.
There you are.
Hey guys, small group, but all these Zoom things are a little bit different, I think.
Where are you guys?
You're on.
Sorry, what's that?
Where are you two?
I am in Bonita Springs, Florida.
Uh-huh.
I like Pete. I would have wanted to Pete to be the VP candidate had we not needed a woman and perhaps a woman of color so badly, but I really like him. I think he's a bright guy and I'm happy to support him.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining. We're so glad to have you all here. While we let some folks just hop on, I will just quickly go over the run of show. We are going to have some really wonderful folks on here, along with Gina and the mayor. We will have Congressman Cicilline and Congressman Takano, who will say a few words. Then we'll go into question and answer because there are so many of you. We have asked you all to submit some questions beforehand, which you all did. So thank you so much for that. So if we should get to everybody's, but if we don't, we'll make sure to try to get your question by email. Just feel free to reach out to Justin or I. You should have our emails by now, and we will try to get to them. So with that, I will hand it over to Mayor Parker, who will get us started.
Always have to find that mute button. So appreciate that. I'm Anise Parker, the former mayor of the city of Houston and current head of the LGBTQ Victory Fund. I am really excited to be here tonight. Won't speak very long, this I promise, because you've got a really great lineup. But Victory supported Gina Ortiz Jones 2 years ago, almost from the moment we heard about her campaign and met her. We knew she had the skill set, the ability to be a great candidate, but also to be a great leader in the House. She has weathered the challenges of campaigning in a tough, sprawling, insanely gerrymandered district. And she has weathered the challenges of a very, very close loss. She got right back up, got into the fray again, and has campaigned aggressively and is now ready to take on the eventual Republican challenger because, well, we don't know who that will be, but she is, whoever shows up on the other side, the best candidate for this position. I'm not going to give a long resume for Gina because I think only she can really tell her story. But what I will say is to have a smart, strong woman, a veteran, someone who understands the immigrant experience, someone who understands those who struggle in our community, and someone who understands the ins and outs of Washington and would be ready to serve on day one. We can't afford not to have her win this time. She came heartbreakingly close the last time. It's time to put her over the top. And tonight's event is a fundraiser designed exactly to do that. So thanks for allowing Victory Fund to be a part of this event.
Thank you so much, Mayor Parker. With that, we will send it over to Congressman Takano.
Hi, did you say my name?
Yes.
Wonderful. Well, Gina, I just had to take some time out. Both David and I are in the middle of votes and we're toggling between being in the chamber, but I definitely want to make sure that I showed up and what an amazing lineup you have from Mayor Parker to Pete Buttigieg and a fellow veteran. I can't wait till you get to Washington. We have to make sure that you do get here to bring your unique voice, that of a veteran, that of an LGBT person, that of an immigrant. And let me say that it was heartbreakingly close, and it was one of my great sources of pride as the co-chair of the Equality PAC that I and KPAC and veterans from Seth Moulton, who was working with veterans, to an array of people who made sure that you had a fair fight in your primary in the last cycle. And I wasn't surprised at all that you emerged as one of the rock star candidates in the 2018 cycle, and that we have great expectations of taking your district, but it's not a fait accompli. It's very important for the participants on this phone call to not ease up, that her race is not in the bag, although by all indications, she has built the organization, she has been fundraising, and she can't stop at this point. So we have so much more work to do in Washington, and it's awfully frustrating to be here in an environment where we don't have the Senate with us, but I have great hopes that in November we're going to change, and Gina is going to be, her race is going to be one of those races that extends our majority and as an insurance for our majority in case some of our other frontliners don't make it through. But I have high expectations that all our frontliners are going to make it through and that we're going to enlarge our majority. Gina is our majority enlarger, and we need to have her here, and we need we need to enlarge the LGBT caucus. I once again want to proclaim that we've elected the gayest Congress in history, because we've also retained all of our LGBT incumbents, and we've added Gina and others to the list. So Gina, good luck, and everybody, please help her to the maximum.
Thank you so much, Congressman. And with that, I'll just pass it to Adam Barth, if you want to introduce the mayor.
Thanks so much, Mahona. Good evening, everyone. My name is Adam Barth, and along with my wife, Elizabeth, and our daughter, Becca, we're honored to be co-hosts for this event to support Gina, and it's a pleasure to introduce Pete Buttigieg. I first had the opportunity to meet Pete a little over 10 years ago in the basement of a dive bar in Washington, D.C., as he launched his campaign to become state treasurer in Indiana. And even above the skee ball related background noise, it didn't take much time to see how special of a candidate he was, as he articulated vision for the positive role that politics and policy can play in people's lives. And so in the years that followed, Liz and I watched as he returned home to lead his hometown. We watched as he served in Afghanistan and then came back to foster the continued transformation of South Bend. And we watched as he came out in the midst of his re-election campaign and still won 80+% of the vote. And fast forward a couple of years, in the depths of our despair, and I'm sure like so many of you following the 2016 election, we were reinvigorated by his campaign for DNC chair, and used that as a channel for us to help however we could. And most importantly, it gave us a chance to meet Chasten. So when Pete announced his exploratory committee for president, we were excited, but we admittedly didn't know what the trail would hold. Not a long track record of 38-year-old left-handed Maltese American mayors running for president. But needless to say, the response was overwhelming. We saw people around the country get to know the man that we knew. Someone who talks about politics being both local but also personal. Someone whose message of reclaiming our values and framing a new vision for freedom, democracy, and security clearly resonated with so many around the country from all walks of life. And someone who, importantly to this family living in Texas, loves Texas brisket when he comes to visit us. And so yeah, it's my pleasure to introduce Pete. It's also my pleasure to support Gina. And in Gina, we see such an incredible candidate, and folks have spoken already, who truly embodies these same values that got us so excited to support Pete. And so energized to continue that tradition and that level of support. So it's an honor tonight and a pleasure to be here today to support Gina and to introduce our friend, Mayor Pete Buttigieg.
Well, thanks so much, Adam and Liz. It's great seeing you. And, there were not a lot of people there at the very beginning of the presidential campaign. There were really not a lot of people there at the beginning of the race for Indiana State Treasurer. And I'm so thankful that I've been able to look to you as a friend and as an ally at every turn. So thrilled we could be joined by Representative Takano as well. I know he and Representative Cicilline are literally in the middle of votes right now, but those votes are reminding us what's at stake and why it is so important that we elect Gina Ortiz Jones. I want to thank all of our co-hosts and everybody who's part of this, generously supporting an event like this, knowing just how many Zoom calls, especially some of the folks here I know because I see you on a lot of them, just how many Zoom calls you all do, how many people are in your ear, and how much activity is going on. I'm glad that you're joining me in prioritizing this race in this campaign because it's a huge opportunity. When I first learned about Gina Ortiz Jones and her race to unseat Will Hurd, I was fascinated by somebody from my generation of veterans, a trailblazer in terms of not just the LGBT community, but her experience as a first-generation American, and somebody who really embodies that idea that politics is at its best when we come at it through a personal perspective, when we remember that it's not about the ups and downs of the poll numbers or who got a good zinger off in a debate, but the fact that our lives, our opportunities to serve, our pocketbooks, and even our marriages are at stake in the decisions that are made in Washington. And it didn't take long to see that Gina is somebody who embodies that approach to politics through her story, but also, not everybody with a great profile, not everybody who looks good on paper proves out. And I know that with Mayor Parker on the line, who has supported so many critically important races to expand out representation in office in this country, they've also been really exacting in terms of their expectations for candidates. And the fantastic thing about Gina Ortiz Jones is she's truly got the full package in terms of capability, policy, intellect, and political adaptability to the situations that we find ourselves in now. To be in a district like hers with its geographic size, not to mention the way it sits on the knife edge of those districts that could go either way. Watching her work in 2018, supporting her as I was proud to do, we saw her come tantalizingly close. And I don't know that I can prove the cause and effect, but it wasn't that long after she announced she was going to run again that the incumbent announced that he wasn't. And I think it's fair to say that she scared the incumbent out of that race. As Mark said, we have got to build on and expand our majority in the U.S. House. Right now, that House majority is the only thing between us and disaster. And a lot of common sense policies, like, making sure that there were funds for testing for COVID-19, were treated as concessions to Democrats, even though I think most of us would regard those as just basic common sense things that this country's got to do. They're only in there because they only happen because House Democrats fought for them. So that's the majority that we are getting an opportunity to firm up and contribute to and expand, in addition to the fact that the district in Texas where Gina is going to serve will be so well served by somebody with her experience and her patriotism. Look, we are seeing in the most disturbing possible terms what can happen when a president doesn't put the lives of our troops first. But it's not just that. It's the fact that he is enabled and protected by congressional GOP members who deep down know better, but cannot summon the courage to put country over party. And that's why, being from a generation of veterans, having the national security perspective and experience that she does is one more reason why we need her voice in Washington. This is the last day of Pride Month, and it's a great moment for us all to be together. It's also the last day of the quarter and a critically important deadline. Everybody here, I know I'm preaching to the choir, but it is so important to make sure that she puts up a good total tonight and has the resources to continue competing. And if you're not already a big fan, if you're relatively new, I think by the end of this hour, you'll see why I'm so thrilled to support her and why she was a natural fit and rose very quickly onto the list, even when we were scanning so many competitive and deserving races in deciding who we would endorse with Win the Era over the course of this summer. So I don't want to talk about her when she anymore when she can impress you on her own rights. So without further ado, let me turn it over to the soon-to-be member of Congress and a great friend, somebody I'm proud to support, Gina Ortiz Jones.
Well, thank you, Mayor Pete. It's always nice to see you, and I am just honored, really, by your continued support. And I want to start with, with Mayor Parker, the LGBTQ Victory Fund. When they say they were there early, often until the end, they absolutely were. You can imagine, right? There were some folks in 2018 when I said, hey, I want to run for Congress. I want to run to represent my home district. And oh, by the way, I'm a first-generation lesbian vet. How's that going to work out, right? Well, you can that did not go over too well with some folks, and they had some misgivings. But LGBTQ Victory Fund was with us there and supportive, because again, we're doing this for the right reasons and really want to make sure that we get our country back on the right track. And obviously, anybody running for any progressive running for office in Texas does so on the shoulders of Mayor Anise Parker, given her steadfast leadership in Houston and her example. So thank you. And Representative Takano, I'm not sure if you're still on, and Representative Cicilline, thank you so much for, of course, your leadership and your example. Representative Takano chairs the House Veterans Committee, and the work that he is doing to make sure that all veterans are well served, right? Certainly, veterans of every generation, but also female veterans, LGBTQ veterans, right? To make sure that they are treated and afforded the same services and benefits that every veteran has earned. So really appreciate his leadership on a number of fronts. And each of them, they practice what they preach. They've done what the lesson that I think Mayor Pete and I learned very early on in our service, which is your number one job as a leader is to develop more leaders. And Representative Cicilline and Representative Takano, and helping and pull folks up behind them have done just that. So I'm very appreciative of their continued support. And of course, Mayor Pete, the example that you've set in a number of ways continues to inspire people like me. I know a lot of folks, but I used to say in my lifetime, I've seen the implementation of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, the implementation of the trans ban, and the first viable LGBTQ candidate for president announced his candidacy. And the last two things happened within 48 hours of each other, right? So that just shows you the very real forces pulling at our country in two very different directions. But I'm so honored to have your leadership and your example, Pete, that I think is really opened the eyes of so many Americans about what's possible if you're truly focused about what matters most in our public servants. And that's why that is their why they want to serve and how they're going to serve. So thank you so much for your support. And you could be resting on your laurels and thinking about what a great campaign that you ran, but you are still in the trenches and making sure that certainly Vice President Joe Biden gets elected, which is just existential to our country, but also understanding the importance of down ballot races. So thank you, thank you, thank you. And thank you all for joining us. I scroll through the tiles and I've seen many names that have been with us, again, early, often, and to the end here. So I want to thank you for your support. And as soon as anyone figures out, what we can do with these Zoom miles, we used to be collecting frequent flyer miles, but now we're collecting Zoom miles. As soon as anyone figures out where we can trade these things in, please let me know, right? But what I wanted to do is give you just a snapshot of kind of where we are with the campaign. We're just 120-ish days from ending this national nightmare, but also making sure that we flip this seat. So for those of you that that are joining us for the first time that I haven't met yet, I want to give you a sense of why I'm running, right? I think that's the most important aspect for anybody seeking any of these offices. And my story really starts over 40 years ago. My mom came to this country. She graduated from the #1 university in the Philippines, but she wanted a chance at the American dream. She wanted a chance at a country whose promise is if you work hard, the sky's the limit. Because she, like so many people all over this world, they know from a very young age that in order to live their best possible life, they'll probably have to leave their home country. And for many, that means trying to come to our special country in any form or any fashion. So my mom raised my younger sister and I by herself, and she reminded us every single day that we were lucky to be born here, not smart to be born here. We were lucky to be born here, and we'd have to give back to a country that gave us so much. It's why my sister serves in the Navy to this day, and it's why I served in the Air Force and in national security for almost 15 years. But as mentioned, she raised us by herself. I think there's a special place in heaven for single mothers, and that place is probably open bar, as it should be. Reduced lunch, subsidized housing, those were critical investments, not handouts, investments that allowed me to earn a 4-year Air Force ROTC scholarship that took me from John Jay High School here in San Antonio to Boston University. And I will never forget one of the very first things I had to do, even before my very first class at BU, I had to sign a piece of paper that said, I will not engage in homosexual behavior, because don't ask, don't tell applied to me even as a cadet. So my opportunity to get an education, my opportunity to serve our country, my opportunity to die for our country, all of that goes away just because at the time there were not leaders with enough courage to say anybody ready and willing to serve their country should be able to do so. And so that's why dreamers hold a special place in my heart. I might not be a dreamer, but I know exactly what it feels like to have worked hard for something and live in fear that it could be taken away from you, right? I live right down the street from the University of Texas at San Antonio, one of the universities with the largest student dreamer population. And we've seen how the Secretary of Education has used this pandemic as an opportunity to push vulnerable people into circumstances that would make them even more vulnerable. So I look forward to fighting for our dreamers to make sure that we put them on a path to citizenship and make sure that we recognize these young people that want to give back to a country that's given them so much. After Boston University, I served in the Air Force as an intelligence officer. I deployed to Iraq. After my deployment, I came home to surprise my mom, and she surprised me. She said that while I was gone, she'd been diagnosed with colon cancer, had the surgery to have it removed, and was already undergoing chemotherapy. So I made the decision then, look, I'm going to have a lot of jobs in my lifetime, but one mom, and it was important for me to be with her during that time. So I came back to San Antonio to make sure that I could be with her. I advised on operations all over Latin America. I was invited to be part of the initial team of U.S. Africa Command that advised on military operations all over the continent. Everything from the vote for independence in South Sudan to being part of the intelligence cell that supported the Libya crisis. And it was really, that was a key moment. And I think about that experience often, especially as we are seeing what's happening on our streets, right? As we are not only dealing with a pandemic, but as well as an economic crisis, but also a reckoning based on the long racial inequities for too long that have affected our Black communities. And for me, I also understand that in the context of national security, because I understand that, the injustice that caused that young man to set himself on fire in Tunisia, that started then the Arab Spring. That's the same injustice that we're seeing that we've seen in Minneapolis, that we've seen in Baltimore, that we've seen in Ferguson. My concern is that if we don't have enough folks that have a diversity in socioeconomic background and gender, what have you, we're not going to have enough people that want to serve our country, and that's a national security issue. I talk a lot about opportunities because I know that it was my public education, it was the investments by my community and my country that allowed me to earn that scholarship, that allowed me to go on and serve our country. And so I knew in 2016 that my time in public service might need to be different. I've served in countries where women and minorities are targeted. I've served in countries where government's disregard for conflict of interest has hollowed out those countries. And I've seen what happens when good people don't stand up in the face of tyranny. So I also talk about or think about, the investments that allowed me, a kid that grew up in 78245, that allowed me to go from reduced lunch to serving in the executive office of the president, right? It's a very special country where the daughter of somebody who came here as a domestic helper can one day run for Congress. I talk a lot about those opportunities because I think at the end of the day, a member of Congress, regardless of what committee they sit on, what committee they chair, a member of Congress does three things. They create opportunities, they protect opportunities, or they erase opportunities. They do that with their voting record, they do that with their record of silence, and we're seeing every single day just how dangerous that silence can be. So I threw my hat in the ring in 2017, came up just short, 900 and some odd votes, despite being massively outspent. And when I saw my community not being well represented again, knew I needed to get back in the ring. And I'm so, again, honored to have your support as we work to flip this seat. And yes, you know, people always say, well, what's different about this time? Well, I mean, I got tired of running against Will Hurd, so we scared his ass out of this race. It's an open seat in a district that Hillary won. The National Journal thinks it is the seat most likely to flip. But the NRCC has said they're going to fight tooth and nail for it. And to show you just how competitive this district has been, you know, Will Hurd has won 3 times and has never broken 50%. Right? So this district was drawn to be competitive. We cannot make any assumptions. You make assumptions in this race, they'll be proven wrong. So we know we've just got to run through the tape, and that's why we're continuing to work so hard, and will do so over the next 120 days to make sure that we flip this seat, we protect the majority, and we make sure we get our country back on the right track. I think I will stop there. I know we've got some good questions, so I want to make sure that we have enough time to get to those. But thank you again for making time this evening as we flip this seat.
Gina, before we open for question and answer, Congressman Cicilline
has
just joined, so I will let him take the floor.
Thank you so much, and I'm sorry to be late. It's great to see you, Mayor Pete. Great to see you, Anise. Thank you to the Victory Fund, and thank you to Gina Ortiz-Jones for running and for being such an extraordinary candidate. As she just mentioned, this is a tough district. This is a seat we absolutely must win, not only because we need to grow the Democratic majority in the House, but because she will be an extraordinary member of Congress. And her life story is remarkable, and I have had the privilege of getting to know her over the last couple of years, and I know that she is on the verge of a great victory, not only for her constituents, her state, but for our country. And I know people have said this in the past, you know, this is the most important election of our lifetime, and we all say that, but when you consider what we have endured for the last 3.5 years in this country, this is indeed the most important election of our lifetime. If we think of the damage that this administration has done and what it would have been like if we didn't at least have the House to try to stop some of the worst excesses of this administration. And now to be on the precipice of not only strengthening our majority in the House, but taking the Senate, taking the White House, President Biden, and being able to move forward on an agenda that really does provide full equality for our community, ensures that people have economic opportunities, that we're taking on the challenges of climate in a serious way, that we're passing the Equality Act and responding to the grotesque racism in this country in a really significant way. And so I think in a lot of ways, this moment is an awakening for our country. People want to see us move forward on all the issues that I just mentioned and many more. And Gina Ortiz-Jones will be part of that majority. She's running a magnificent campaign, but she needs your financial support to make sure she can get over the finish line and get elected to Congress. And I know she will do great things there. So Gina, we love you. Good luck, Mayor Pete. It's spectacular to see you. Thank you for the incredible pride you brought to our community and continue to do so. And I'll yield back and again, congratulate you on a great campaign.
Thanks so much.
So with that, we can just begin the question and answers. The first question, we got a couple of folks who wrote in asking about the effects of COVID in your districts and cities, and also specifically, Gina, if you can talk a little bit about the effects of COVID on rural and border towns in this district.
Sure. I should have given you a little bit overview of the district for those that are not super familiar. So it's from San Antonio to El Paso. That's 500 miles across. And for context, that's like Manhattan to Raleigh, North Carolina, or Chicago to Memphis, or San Francisco to San Diego, right? It's a district larger than 30 states. We also have 800 miles of the US-Mexico border, right? So we've got a huge urban area like San Antonio, the 7th largest city in the country. On the other side, we've got El Paso. And then we've got a large rural area, as Mahona just mentioned. And so the experience with COVID-19 has actually been just as diverse. In San Antonio, it's certainly been top of mind very early on, just given how densely populated we are. But up until a couple of weeks ago, as I was reaching out to elected officials in the rural parts of our community in more of the Permian Basin area, the number one issue there was not COVID-19. The number one issue there was the fallout of the oil economy and how those depressed prices were affecting local community leaders' budgeting as they just entered budgeting season, but what that would also mean for their communities. And so I think that's just really important to just appreciate is, unfortunately, now our rural communities are really going through it. I mean, we always knew there'd be about a month or 6-week delay in what they're experiencing. Unfortunately, it's hit them pretty hard. And so one of the things that has really brought to the forefront is the ways in which, the healthcare system here in San Antonio, to include the ways in which federal policies disproportionately affect our population here in Texas, because we are the most uninsured state in the country. And this part of the state in particular is the most medically underserved. And so this is of particular importance, certainly in the immediate, but also in the long term, right? 1 in 10 kids in the country calls Texas home. 45% of our kids in Texas rely on CHIP or Medicaid for insurance. We're a state that did not expand under Medicaid. And the median household income before the pandemic was $55K, right? So this is already a district that was in many ways vulnerable to vulnerable period, and certainly has been feeling the harsh effects of this healthcare as well as economic crisis. What we've seen as well is, because we did not expand Medicaid, you've seen in particular our rural communities taking very drastic steps, like furloughing 10% of their staff, for example. Our rural hospital in the Big Bend area, their parent company filed for bankruptcy. And unfortunately, it shows you the misprioritization in the state. We were just a couple weeks ago, Texas has the 2nd largest economy in the country. We were 2nd to last in testing. Right? That's unacceptable. And the fact that now you still have, unfortunately, county and city officials literally begging this governor to allow them to put in place measures that would keep people safe. Like, that is what we are up against. There are too many communities, too many folks that are putting, politics and their fear of a tweet from this president ahead of the actual safety of their citizens. And it's going to cost lives, right? There was just something else today that talked about how, unfortunately, we are still well short of where we need to be in terms of contact tracing, and we've now seen a decrease even in what we have. And so, it's having served in the military, this whole experience is kind of just gobsmacks, because it's unfathomable that, 1, the safety and security of the American people would not be top priority. 2, you wouldn't have clear objectives about what you're trying to accomplish by what time. And 3, this inability to execute is just amazing, right? The complete incompetence throughout, whether it be on not fully implementing the Defense Production Act, to not making sure that you're collecting good data about already vulnerable communities, for example, our Black and Brown communities, to truly understand how those communities are being affected. And then to just not understand that, unless we get a hold of this public health crisis, we're not going to get the economic recovery to where it needs to be. So, it's really certainly frustrating in a number of ways, but the experience has been different in this congressional district throughout, just given some of the geographic differences and what some of these local communities traditionally traditionally look like. In our border and rural communities, one of the things that we do is I've done a virtual town hall every single week, and we've done 13 now. And one of the ones that we did early on, we brought on healthcare professionals that work in, well, they actually fall under both. They're in these rural communities, but they're also these border communities. And what they also do is they serve in this interesting kind of liaison function between them and their counterparts on the other side of the Mexican border. And that's so critical, because if something happens on one side of the border, it's literally, a matter of days until you see it on the other side. So we wanted to get a sense of what those folks were dealing with, what that relationship looked like, and what that information sharing looks like. But, these unfortunately are some of the worst hit communities. We're a district of 29 counties. 18 counties have 3 or less doctors. 3 counties have no doctors. Many communities were not able to quickly transition to online learning, which means telehealth, telepsychiatry, all those other services were not also easily accessible. So we've got a long way to go to make sure that healthcare is certainly affordable, but also accessible. But it takes somebody that thinks that that's something that we need to address. Folks talk about, what's the recovery look like? Well, I think we've all seen what the effects of not having a basic level of infrastructure to allow for these types of services to be provided to every American, every Texan, regardless of where they live.
Okay, we can move to the next question. Mayor Pete, if you'd like to start with this one. Many people wrote in about asking about the effects of this administration on the future of American leadership and on the future of institutions like the DOJ and the State Department.
Yeah, I think it's something we're all going to have to rebuild over the course of a generation. Trust is one of the most fundamental ingredients in a democracy and in any society. And trust in our institutions, which was already pretty rickety, has just been blown up in so many ways by this president and this administration. In many cases, as you mentioned, there are departments like the Department of Justice, State, and others, where also we're just seeing the human capital fleeing. So many dedicated public servants who went into service because they want to do the right thing for the country have been demoralized. Imagine being a justice-minded lawyer in the Department of Justice today and looking around you at what's being done to the department you work in. Imagine being a diplomat who signed up to be part of the Department of State because you wanted to represent the United States abroad, and you did that without regard to party, but now you find yourself on foreign soil trying to defend the conduct of this president. It's tough, but it also creates a huge opportunity. We have an opportunity to rebuild public service with a generation of leaders in civilian roles, in public service, in the military, and I'm hoping in forms of national service that could be massively expanded and are going to need to be, actually, in order to do things like put together the 100,000 plus person strong group of people we're going to need just in order to effectively execute contact tracing in order to stay ahead of the pandemic and safely reopen. So there is a crisis and there's an opportunity. And it's exactly in this context that we need strong leadership in the U.S. House. It's one of the reasons why I'm all in for this race, because when you have somebody who has a service orientation, like Gina Ortiz Jones, in that oversight role, that means that decisions are being made and administration officials, whatever the party, are held accountable for making sure that we're producing results. And I just want to put an exclamation point on her a response to the last question too, because it is so important to have people in federal office in Congress who understand, as she mentioned, the importance of getting resources to local government and local leaders. I'm talking to my friends in the U.S. community of mayors, and it is painful right now. It so much depends, even if it weren't for the absence of leadership in the White House, even if it weren't for that, so much depends on the ability of local leaders to have the resources to manage the situation at hand. And we need people in Congress who get it, and she does. I'm going to take the liberty and jump in just because a comment came up that said, is today the deadline for fundraising? This is a big deadline. So if you're thinking, I've been meaning to send a little more in to this campaign, today before midnight would be a fantastic time to do it. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh, no, please. I just want to say, you know, on the importance of institutions, having served in the intelligence community for almost 15 years, you know, that's one of the institutions where there's not a lot of familiarity, right? And that's by design, right? There needs to not be a lot of familiarity with what they do. And so, you know, over the last couple of days, as we've unfortunately seen reports of this president and his senior leaders that they had access to information about Russian military unit putting a bounty on American soldiers and not having acted in a way that literally any other president would have acted is very concerning. And so to Mayor Pete's point about, you know, imagine being this person and serving, well, imagine being one of the 8,500 plus soldiers in Afghanistan right now, who is maybe one of those folks that reported that intelligence up and months later, almost over a year later, is still waiting for some real action to be taken to make sure that they are kept safe. And so that is, and I bring up that point, and just to piggyback off of the point that Pete just made, is I'm certainly running to represent my community, but I know what's at stake if one of the two folks that I'm running against in this runoff win. And I have a real bone to pick with folks that will wrap themselves up in their national security credentials and then be as corrupt and as complicit as they come. I think those people are the most dangerous because they know better but don't have the courage to do better. And that is what we are seeing, unfortunately, time and time again with some members of Congress that will lean on those credentials, but you would never know it by the actions that they're taking. You know, I talked about it a little bit earlier, but I'm not sure I was super clear. So I want to make sure I make it clear at this point. There's the institution that we have now, but there's also, as Pete mentioned, you know, the pipeline of talent into these institutions is so critical, and rebuilding that trust also will require, I think, rebuilding the trust of young people that government is a place for them, right? You can seek a life of public service. My concern is with this president and attorney general, representatives, what have you, you know, they've made statements, taken actions that suggest they don't see any value in the next generation of Americans. The concern is the next generation of Americans are not going to value public service. And again, if you don't understand Baltimore, if you don't understand Ferguson, if you don't understand Minneapolis, you're not going to understand what sparked the Arab Spring. Those are fundamentally about the same inequities and injustices. And we need, you know, having worked in national security for almost 15 years, we need as a diverse a talent pool as the challenges and opportunities that we face as a country.
Thank you so much to both of you. The next question is about immigration. We got quite a few questions about this, but I think this one wraps them all up quite nicely. Anne writes, like Gina's story, my story is one built on the American dream and my immigrant parents' hard work. I believe that immigrants make the country stronger. This administration seems to be focused on attacking all forms of immigration. How will the administration's recent ban on H-1B and H-4 visas affect the people in your districts? Also, how do we ensure the future safety of dreamers? Gina, with the district at our border with Mexico, how have these harmful policies affected the economies and communities of the towns in your border?
Well, you know, these times I think have really highlighted just what's at stake for these, for so many of our communities. This is it includes San Antonio, which is Military City, USA. Again, we have 800 miles of the Mexico border, US-Mexico border. And so when this president declared the fake national emergency so he could steal from our military, and that's the word we should all be using, steal, you know, that was, anyone that knows that has served knows the importance and the ramifications of that, even if this administration did not. Because even if, you know, it didn't affect you immediately right now, it will affect somebody you deployed with. It'll probably affect somebody that you trained with, or maybe somebody that didn't have that training as a result of these cuts that were made for political reasons. And you know, during these last couple of weeks, many of you may have seen the article where this administration wants to spend $1.3 billion to build 42 miles of border wall. That is $30 million a mile. to just take a drive in just here in San Antonio, on the south side of San Antonio. I mean, what you could do with $30 million, much less what could be done throughout this district with some of those resources to lay down the fiber, to make sure that everyone has access to broadband, to make sure that we have enough medical personnel in our communities, and to build the infrastructure that our border communities actually want and know is critical to their long-term economic security. I'll never forget, sitting down with the former mayor of Eagle Pass. Eagle Pass is a community right on the border, literally like a mile from the border. The sister city is Piedras Negras. And there are 2 international bridges that connect those 2 communities. And he said 46% of my city's revenue comes from those 2 international bridges. I don't need a wall, I need a 3rd bridge. Right? Like that is literally how these communities understand that relationship, their economic, their social, their cultural ties, and their sources of strength. And so investing in the infrastructure that allows those communities to capitalize on that makes more sense for them, because again, that's more more resources for their streets and their schools and their hospitals. This is so critical also to our ag community. This is a district where 800 million plus in market value sales comes from ag. And I was speaking to, she owns a Black Angus ranch in West Texas. And she said, look, there is no agriculture without immigration, right? So it's been interesting how this issue cuts across many lines, because people understand the necessity of this workforce, not only to their immediate needs, but also to our recovery. When you look at the types of visas that this president is targeting and who he's actually going after, he's going after folks that have come to our country, studied in our schools, and want to remain here so they can and then contribute their advanced skill set to our country and to our economy. So the idea that we would, one, prevent these folks from coming here and paying full tuition, or prevent them from staying here after they've just gotten their advanced degree and now we were going to force them to go to Canada or to France or to some other country, all that does is delay our economic recovery. And I mean, let's be clear, some of these folks have worked on specialties in fields that have national security implications. So we should absolutely retain that talent, and not force those folks to feel like they can't come here, can't study here, and have to go apply those skills someplace else. It just doesn't make sense in the long or short economic reasons. Texas also is the home of 1 in 6 active DACA recipients, right? 1 in 6, 150,000 DACA recipients. So that Supreme Court decision was critical, but we know that this administration is going to continue to come after and try to erase that, do away with that program, which would be so unfortunate. Again, I live right down the street from the University of Texas in San Antonio, one of the largest Dreamer student populations in the country. And it's critical to our economy that we make sure that we are thinking about these policies in the right way and not shooting ourselves in the foot for seemingly political gains.
I just wanted to turn it over to the mayor in case he had anything to add.
Just that, when you talk about your district, I feel like I'm there with you. It's amazing how, and I can tell from the faces, and I can tell from the comments that folks are as impressed as I am. And again, this is what it's like when we talk about these things, no longer in terms of the politics, how can I score some points by attacking a group of people, but in terms of lives, the lives of the Dreamers who are very much part of our communities, who are absolutely Americans, even if they don't have documentation to certify that. And also in the economy and the life of the district and the communities that we're talking about. I can tell you South Bend is certainly worse off when there are restrictions on immigration at every level. When you think about the H-1Bs, I think about our inaugural chief innovation officer for the city, who was from Colombia, who did a magnificent job taking, as you can imagine, Midwest municipal government's not known for being on the cutting edge of technology, wound up doing such a good job that by the end of his tenure, South Bend was taking its seat alongside cities like Boston and Los Angeles, really leading the way and making citizens and residents better off. And then he himself became a citizen. He much like my father, who came to this country, because of the opportunities that were here, and then chose to become an American citizen. You know, for us to close that off is for us to do a disservice not only to those who are caught up in these policies, but to our communities and to our entire country.
Thank you so much. We can start with the mayor on this, as people wanted to know what you both are doing to build diverse benches to make sure that we have candidates and electeds that look like the folks that they're representing.
Yeah, so that's exactly why we're here. One of the biggest priorities of Win the Era was to make sure that we were backing, and with your help, we were making a big difference in helping deserving candidates who really reflect across the range of candidates who are supporting the future of this country, and who reflect the communities that they serve and are often pioneering, representing firsts, as Gina would represent so many firsts for her district, but also would represent so many lives and stories that are reflected in hers. We've got a responsibility to do everything that we can. It's why, while I am all in for the vice president and doing everything I can to get him elected, if you've heard me once, you've heard me say many times that the presidency is not the only office that we can care about right now. We've got to make sure that we are supporting across the board, especially in these times, diverse candidates. And by the way, as I know Gina's committed to doing, and we've been able to do, diverse political teams and staff who are doing such a great job of, and many of them will run themselves, but no matter what role they play, are playing such critical leadership roles going forward. You know, I was thinking about, today's not just the last day of Pride, not just the last day of the quarter, it's the midpoint of the year. And it also happens to be the midpoint between when I stepped out of the race in March and Election Day in November. So what that means is the impeachment of the president, the resolution of the Democratic presidential nominating process, the arrival of the pandemic, the death of George Floyd, and the anguish around our country over systemic racism that followed, the revelations about China and about Russia in the White House, all of that has just been the first half of this year. So that should remind us, first of all, just how much can happen in a few months, which is one of the reasons we got to be on our toes. If the election's today, Gina wins, but we've got to make sure that we are there every step of the way. But it's also a reminder of the kinds of problems affecting people in different ways that this country is faced with. And we're just not going to meet the moment unless we meet that moment with leadership that is diverse as the country facing those challenges.
Thank you so much. And with time running out, we did promise Mark that we would ask Gina this last question, which is, Gina, as you know, Texans like you and me take their salsa very seriously. Some, however, are of the opinion that salsa goes best with ranch dressing. What is your position on this?
Well, look, bless his heart, right? I mean, this is to each their own. I don't know of any Texan that does the salsa with ranch, but you know, this is a big tent salsa crew. So I'm not going to judge anybody for their salsa preferences.
Well, that's just the kind of non-judgmental, open, and accepting leadership that I think is going to build bridges across this divided country of ours. So thanks for your forbearance there.
With that, Liz, I'm going to turn it over to you.
Awesome, thank you. I'll just say a few words to wrap. John and I are honored to be a part of this event and so happy to be able to support Gina. Want to thank the rest of the host committee and everybody who contributed to the conversation, Mayor Parker, the Congressmen, of course, Pete and Win the Era, and Gina and her team. I don't have to tell you how important this race is. You just heard all about it. And as Pete said, you stole my thunder here, Pete. I had written this with great intent. I can think of no better way to end the quarter and celebrate Pride than being a multiplier for Gina's campaign. So a point well made and certainly super important as we close out the deadline this evening. If you can chip in a little extra, I've already seen some pledges in the chat. Fantastic. Let's keep it going. Share the race with your networks. And let's help Gina win big in the Texas 23rd. Thanks so much for your support and for spending part of your Tuesday evening with us.
Thank you all so much.
Great event, everybody. Thanks for being part of this.
Thank you so much, everyone.